Okay, let's do this. All right, so you may or may not know, but there was a short video put out today by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Um, so we're going to talk about it. I've been very critical of Trump. I've been very critical of Hegseth and DoD as a whole. So here's what we're going to do. We're gonna set aside um, what we overall may think about the Trump administration or about even President Trump the man or Pete Hegseth or the fact that he's in this position. So let's just set that aside for a moment and let's just evaluate what is said in the video and try and look at that and then think about okay, if DoD is serious about conducting certain reforms, what exactly are they going to have to do to meet the objectives that they have stated they want to meet? All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So today a video came out. It was posted by the Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth on his official Twitter account or X account. So it was put out this morning, and he just kind of put as a caption in the post, America's sons and daughters who serve in our military deserve the best leaders, which is why we are reforming the promotion system at DoD. So that's what it says. So, of course, I agree with that. No heartburn with that. America's, this is something that I've said pretty much in the exact same words, that America's sons and daughters deserve leaders who are going to follow the law and who are going to uphold their oaths of office to support and defend the Constitution. And so when I have used very similar language before, it has been in the vein of, hey, they're not doing that. Americans deserve better. Americans deserve to know that they or that their sons and daughters are being put under the leadership of people who will abide by their oaths or who will follow the law or who will not deprive America's sons and daughters of their constitutionally protected rights, etc. But anyway, so no heartburn there. So basically, he says, hey, America's sons and daughters deserve the best leadership in the military. And so in order to give them that, we at DoD have to reform our promotion system. So that's kind of how he opens up the video. And again, that's just the caption in the post. The video is only a couple of minutes long. I will say this. So Secretary Hegseth, some people may criticize him because he puts out these short videos or he announces a lot of stuff on Twitter. I don't necessarily have a problem with that per se. I think that is a good way to reach a lot of people. And I think that he is actually very good at taking a very short video, videos that are 2 to 3 minutes in length, but that punch pretty hard. They kind of punch above their weight class in terms of the info that is put out in a very direct way and yet in a very short video. So that I think he does very well. I've said this before. I do think he's very articulate. I think he's in the position because I think he does look the part. And when I say he looks the part, it's that he looks a lot different than his predecessors because he is so much younger. He is not a retired 4-star general, etc. So in that regards, he looks the part in that it's almost like a paradoxical statement. And I mean it that way because he looks the part in that he looks so much different than what his predecessors were or than what we kind of assumed the part to be. And we're supposed to think that that's a good thing because obviously the previous secretaries of defense, didn't get it done. They committed a lot of errors. Anyway, let me just leave it at that because we're not even into the video yet. So, all right. So what does he actually say? I'm not going to play the video for you. You can go find it. I'll put the link to his Twitter account. Like I said, it's I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes long. It's very, very short, but here's kind of what he says, just so you know. I'll just give you a very quick summary and then you can go check it out for yourself. But first of all, he's accompanied in the video by Stu Scheller. Well, who is Stu Scheller? So Stu Scheller was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. I'm assuming many of you probably know that name, but if you don't, so he was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps at the same time that I was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And he was having his own problems at the same time that I was having my problems. In fact, we were both battalion commanders. So how did he get in trouble? Well, he got in trouble because he put a video out there publicly in which he spoke out very directly about the botched Afghanistan withdrawal. But his specific message was, look at what our senior leaders have been involved in with this botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, and there has been zero accountability. So that was kind of the crux of his message, zero accountability. So he put that video out. I mean, all of this was happening with the botched Afghanistan withdrawal at about the same time that DoD's COVID shot mandate went into effect. I mean, those pretty much happened, right on top of each other. And so he's arguing about lack of accountability over here, just as many of us for the last couple of years have been arguing about lack of accountability over here, right? His message was, look what happened with the botched Afghanistan withdrawal. And many of us over here were saying, look at what's going on with this unlawful mandate. In any case, what happened to him? He was relieved of his battalion command. He was court-martialed. He was placed in pre-trial confinement leading up to his court-martial. I don't remember exactly how long he was confined for, but he was in confinement. I don't think it was a very long period of time, but again, that's irrelevant. He was in pre-trial confinement, and ultimately he was discharged from service. I don't remember exactly how many years of service that he had, but I'm pretty sure that he also was shy of 20. He wrote a book. I believe the book is called Crisis of Command. I have not read the book. I should get around to reading it. It's one of those books that's kind of on my list to read. I just haven't gotten to it yet. So in military accountability circles, Stu Scheller has kind of been on a similar mission, because his fight wasn't necessarily the COVID shot mandate per se, but his message was there needs to be greater accountability in the military, particularly at the senior ranks. And so in that regard, he's kind of similar to Matt Lohmeyer. Matt Lohmeyer, Space Force, also relieved of command, also, lost his career because of a book that he had published, Irresistible Revolution, which I have reviewed in another video. And again, his fight wasn't the COVID shot mandate, but he was saying, hey, I'm seeing a lot of problems in the military and no one is speaking out about this, so I'm going to. And in his mind, or the problem that he saw was the Marxist infiltration of the military. But in some ways, Matt Lohmeyer was a little bit ahead of the COVID shot mandate, so that wasn't quite his fight. He was involved in another fight that preceded that. But I would say whether it's Matt Lohmeyer or whether it's Stu Scheller, they still very much have been involved in this struggle for military accountability. So anyway, that's Stu Scheller if you are not aware of who he is. So in this short video, you have the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and then you have Stu Scheller. And Stu Scheller now has a position in the Department of Defense. I should have looked this up. I don't remember exactly what his position is. But there's a reason that he's in the video, and it's because he is going to be involved in some of these reforms about promotion systems that Pete Hegseth is going to talk about. And a lot of that comes from ideas about reform that Stu Scheller had mentioned before, and they're probably in his book too. But anyway, I've seen him mention these ideas before, and I'm sure when I get around to reading the book, they're in there too. Anyway, okay, so the two of them are in the video. So Pete Hegseth basically opens the video by saying, hey, President Trump has now been in position for 6 months, which is true. Today's July 20th. Inauguration was January 20th. Yeah, so 6 months. And he says, in the time that Trump has been in office, here's what DoD has been working on. And he mentions 3 main initiatives. So he says they are restoring the warrior ethos, rebuilding the military, and reestablishing deterrence. Okay? So let me just say that again. Restoring the warrior ethos, rebuilding the military, and reestablishing deterrence. So the Secretary of Defense says those are the three main initiatives DoD has been focusing on over the last 6 months. And then he goes on to kind of, you know, mention some things that have happened over the last couple of months. And he says, hey, DEI, CRT, social justice, those are gone. So, and when he says that, I'm assuming he's mentioning, hey, this is how we restore the warrior ethos. We get rid of those things that have nothing to do with the warrior ethos. And I would agree. I mean, I applaud DoD's actions along that line of effort, per se, this line of effort to restore the warrior ethos. I do think they've done some good things there. I think those are lower hanging fruit compared to some of the more substantive issues, but they have made some positive movements there. So, give credit where credit is due. He then says high standards are back, recruitment is up. And he talks about that a little bit. And so I'm assuming that is a little bit more, that could be restoring the warrior ethos, but it could also be rebuilding the military, particularly recruitment. Like that's really about rebuilding the military. High standards being back could be, kind of, it could get after the first line of effort, restoring the warrior ethos, but also get after the second line of effort, which is rebuilding the military. And then he goes on to say, hey, you got bad actors out there like Iran or the Houthis, and they know that Trump means business. That's obviously him just kind of giving a nod to that third initiative that he mentioned, reestablishing deterrence. All right. Then he mentions leadership, and this is, with kind of that preamble out of the way, this is kind of where he's getting into the direct message that he has in this video. And he says, hey, America's sons and daughters deserve the best leaders. And so DoD, in order to ensure that we have those leaders, DoD has got to reform its promotion system. And then he mentions that there's a guy named Anthony Tata. Now, Anthony Tata is a retired from the Army as a brigadier general. And he mentions that he has just been confirmed as the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness. Now, who's Anthony Tata? So go look him up. You might think there are some questions in his personal background. Go look that up. What I will tell you is, I mean, I don't want to say that I knew General Tata very well, but when I was a lieutenant in the 10th Mountain Division, he was a brigadier general in the division as well, and he was one of the two deputy commanding generals. Okay, so a division in the Army is commanded by a major general, which is a 2-star general, and then the division commander, that 2-star general, will typically have 2 deputies, and those deputies will both be 1-star generals, and he was one of those deputy commanders for the division. And I mean, I can remember, I do have a couple of memories of him and his engagements with our unit various times when we were on a deployment to Afghanistan in 2006. Okay, great. So that's General Tata. He is now going to be the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness. So the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. So anyway, you guys can go look him up and you can draw your own conclusions about him. He was kind of a character, though, and I say this as a lieutenant. What does a lieutenant know about a 1-star general? But yeah, he was kind of a character then. So anyway, whatever. So Hegseth mentions that, and then he turns to Stu Scheller, who is standing right next to him, and he kind of acknowledges Stu, and he says, hey, my friend here, Stu, he spoke up when no one else would, and we need officers who know where their compass is. That's what Hegseth says. And then so he mentions how this review for the promotion system has got to be comprehensive. The right incentives have to be placed, have to be in place, and the system has to prioritize the right type of talent so that the true talent rises, to the top of the system. Which, of course, I mean, we would all agree with. If you don't look for the right things, if you don't select for the right things, then you're not going to get the right people that rise in rank. So Stu Scheller in the video, then he speaks up. He thanks Secretary of Defense Hegseth. He mentions that, yeah, we got to get these things right. And then he says, people, ideas, things in that order. Now that's an interesting statement because he is almost assuredly getting that from John Boyd. So John Boyd was an Air Force pilot, fighter pilot, very well known in the military, and had some very interesting ideas that he applied to kind of military thinking and strategy writ large. If you've ever heard of the OODA loop, then that came from Boyd. That's super, super well known now, but that came from John Boyd. So he was an Air Force fighter pilot who became this big time military thinker that really revolutionized the way in which the U.S. Armed Forces think about strategy or just military thought in general. And he is heavily studied by the Marines. So he himself was an Air Force pilot, but Marines really like John Boyd. The other services do too. We studied a bit of Boyd, but Marines really like him. I mean, I like Boyd too, so all good. But I caught that Stu Scheller kind of made that statement: people, ideas, things in that order. Now, sometimes you'll hear that same statement attributed to Boyd, but you'll hear it, people, ideas, hardware, people, ideas, machines. But again, people, ideas, things, people, ideas, hardware, machines. It's all the same thing, and almost assuredly he's referencing Boyd there. And I don't have a problem with that. We will come back to this. So this is kind of where the video ends. So what are my thoughts? Well, before we get there to kind of my thoughts on this, I want to draw attention to a memo that came up. And so this memo, so when the video was posted by Secretary of Defense Hegseth to his Twitter account this morning, and he tagged Stu Scheller in it. So Stu Scheller, in a comment below, put a screenshot of a memo. And I tried to go find that memo. I could not find a link to the memo so that I could give it to you guys, but you can go find the screenshot. So if you just, I'll put the link to it so you can at least go find the screenshot. It's just a one-page memo, but I am going to bring it up here so that we can look at it. Okay. So hopefully you guys can see that. We'll look through this. What does this say here? So this is dated January 20th. So a month ago. I'm sorry, June 20th, 2025. So dated a month ago. And it is a memo from the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. Now, I just stated a minute ago that Pete Hegseth said that Anthony Tata, who I said, again, was a retired brigadier general. So he is going to be the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. But the guy who has been in the position performing those duties is this guy down here, Jules W. Hurst III. And anyway, so he signed this memo a month ago. So what does it say? Memorandum for secretaries of the military departments. So that would be Department of the Army, Department of the Navy, etc. Subject: evaluating military officer promotion and selection procedures. So this has to do with what Hegseth was kind of talking about in the video. The Secretary of Defense is committed to fair, transparent, colorblind, and merit-based processes to select and promote the best officers to lead our men and women in defense of our nation. Great, no issues there. As such, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness will assess current programs and policy, including Department of Defense Instruction 1320.14, DoD Commissioned Officer Promotion Program Procedures, dated December 16, 2020, to ensure we select superior military leaders. Objective standards and measures should be at the forefront of the promotion and selection process. Okay. I mean, how could you have anything against that paragraph? What he's saying is, hey, listen, we got to take this seriously. We got to make sure that we have the best officers to lead our men and women in defense of the nation. What we're going to do is we're going to review our current officer promotion system so that where we need to make changes, we will make those changes. All right, so it goes on. The holistic review of military officer promotion and selection processes across the department will incorporate an examination of current policies and procedures to examine. And then he gives 4 bullet points of what they're going to examine as part of this review. So first bullet point, evaluations, current performance evaluations across the services and the objective markers associated with each. All right, what are evaluations? So evaluations are your report card that you receive in the military. In the Army, and I'm assuming with the other service branches, it's very similar, but you would get one about every year. Sometimes if you change duty title or you move to a different unit, you may get one kind of on your way out the door. So it could be a period shorter than a year, but typically you're going to get an annual review from your supervisor. And in the Army, there is a portion that is done by your direct supervisor and then your supervisor 2 levels up. That's how it's done in the Army. I assume it's similar, in the Navy, Air Force, et cetera. But obviously those evaluations carry enormous weight when it comes time for consideration for promotions to the next rank. So if you're going to do a comprehensive review of your promotion system, of course you have to look at how your evaluations are written and what is the Army or the Air Force or whatever, well, what are they looking for in those evaluations to then select from for your next higher ranking officers, right? All right, the second bullet point, promotion selection boards. So they're going to review the current promotion board processes. So a selection board is exactly what it sounds like. It's the board that convenes to determine who will be promoted to the next rank. This is an important one. Okay, so the next bullet, the third bullet, is command selection boards. The training continuum for officer development, including how officers are selected and chosen to lead in formal command roles. So I've written about this before. I was a battalion commander. I'd been a company commander previously in my career. Battalion command is the position that I held when I was relieved for not complying with the COVID shot mandate. Many of you have already heard that story. If not, I've got a whole video dedicated to it. You can just find it, search my videos where you found this one. But also, I've written about this in a Substack that I wrote called Moral Injury. And then I go through some of that Substack in a video that I put out fairly recently called The Paradox of Military Command. So if you want to know my whole story about how what exactly happened when I got relieved of command, there is a video that talks about my personal relief from battalion command. I put it out about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than a year ago. Actually, probably a year and a half ago. You can go find that one. But if you want to find a video where I talk about the importance of military command and kind of the paradox behind that I think is in place right now, that I do not think is being addressed by DoD, then go find my video called The Paradox of Military Command. I will link them down below. But I do think this is important. If you want to get the best leaders, yes, you have to promote the best officers, but you also have to put the best officers in your command positions, because the U.S. military, and I'll speak from the perspective of the Army, but it's the same in the Marine Corps or wherever, and that is we are commander driven. The most important positions in the military are command positions. Okay, so yes, you have to get this right. And I've spoken before, and I think it's in my Paradox of Military Command video, and I know it's in my moral injury piece, where I spoke about the Army, about the time that I was being looked at for a battalion command position. The Army had put in this new process to select battalion commanders. They called it BCAP, the Battalion Commander Assessment Program. And I thought it was very good. I thought I was stationed in Korea. I had to travel from South Korea all the way to Fort Knox, Kentucky to go through a 4-day assessment as part of the selection process for battalion command. So you had to do it in person. So I had to fly all the way from South Korea to Fort Knox, Kentucky to go through that 4-day assessment. And I thought it was very good. I didn't think there was anything that I was asked to do in that assessment that there was nothing that I was asked to do where I thought like, hey, why are you requiring that of me, for battalion command? I thought all of it made sense. And anyway, so my point in sharing that is there are things that the military has tried to do in the last couple of years to revitalize some of their command selection programs, and yet they still have not gone far enough. We'll talk about why in a moment. So the last bullet here on this memo is professional military education, the impact of professional military education on assessing officers. I also would agree with that. Clearly, our professional military education system is severely broken because we have officers who don't understand the oath that they have taken to support and defend the Constitution. We have officers who believe that it is acceptable to break the law. And when I say officers, I mean very, very senior officers. So anyway, just finishing up this memo here, it says, talent management of the U.S. Military Officer Corps is a top priority, and this review will provide valuable feedback to the services and to my office concerning how to enhance the lethality of the force. We must ensure that our promotion and selection processes identify and select the best talent in our ranks. Please provide a service liaison for each of the 4 focus points by July 21st, 2025 to facilitate data pools, virtual meetings, and site visits. My point of contact for this matter is Mr. Stu Scheller, Senior Advisor at, anyway, and then it gives his email address. Okay, great. So what does this mean? So Stu Scheller obviously has a senior advisor role in not just in DoD, but specifically it looks like in the within that part of DoD, which is under the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. So, good for him. I think that's great. I mean, we need people like that there. I hope he has a broad understanding of the problems, but we do need people of integrity in these positions. So again, it's not that I disagree with anything that is written in that memo or anything that was said by Hegseth in the video. I don't. I mean, how could you? It's I'm not going to talk about, is Hegseth a does he want to truly fix these things? Okay, set that aside, our assumptions about him or Trump or whomever. Okay. If these individuals are serious about implementing true reform, do they understand the scope of the problem? Because this all sounds great. You need to change the system. You need to ensure that the system selects for the right criteria so the right individuals actually rise in rank. That's true. Do we know what those criteria are to ensure that the system selects for those criteria? Does DoD understand just how bad the problem is? Okay, and again, I'm going to return to something, and I know we're beating a drum here, but we have to, just beating the same old drum. But that is every single one of our currently serving active duty generals and admirals, with zero exceptions, turned their backs on their oaths to support and defend the Constitution. Every single one of them. They all broke the law. And again, if we want to chalk it up to ignorance, okay, maybe that argument could hold water, 3.5 to 4 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, but not now. Any continued ignorance is willful ignorance. Okay. So as I have said now for, I don't even know how many years, nearly 3 years now, right? Because I've been out of the Army for almost 3 years, stating these things publicly since I got out almost 3 years ago. Our military is full of a bunch of criminals and cowards. I mean, they broke the law. That's a crime. So we can make superficial changes, and it doesn't mean that those aren't good or that those aren't helpful. But we can't ignore the most significant problems that we have within Department of Defense. We can't just focus on superficial improvements and then ignore this stuff. Now, if you take the Secretary of Defense at his word, it at least sounds like he's kind of going after some of these more significant problems. But then we have to look at action and inaction And when we look at this abomination of a process for reinstatement of those who lost their careers to the COVID shot mandate, you can only come to the conclusion that DoD either does not recognize the true scope of the problem, or they don't care to fix it. Well, whichever it is, those are both catastrophic problems. One more catastrophic than the other, but they're both catastrophic problems. So here's the deal, and this is kind of the point that I want to end on, but I want to explore this a little bit, because this is going to sound odd. So the focus of the military has to be readiness and lethality. Actually, lethality was mentioned in the document. And you will hear people use those terms all the time, readiness and lethality, okay? And that has to be the focus. You have to have high readiness across the force, and you have to have a very lethal force. Because at the end of the day, that's what the military exists to do. But so that means we have to have a high level of warfighting. I would agree. Our military has to have a high warrior ethos. We do have to rebuild the military. We have to be led, warfighters have to be led by warfighters. That's true. Totally true. But you have to bring something to the table besides just warfighting. Well, what do you mean? This is what I mean. And this becomes more important the higher up you go. Because what context are you conducting this warfighting within? Can we trust our generals and admirals to conduct their warfighting activities lawfully? Can we? Can we trust this corpus of generals and admirals, this corpus of senior leaders who all just broke the law just a few years ago? So can we trust these guys to carry out their warfighting functions, their warfighting activities, these operations within a lawful construct? Can we trust them to protect the rights of their service members, the constitutionally protected rights of their service members? Will they uphold them? Well, recent history would tell us no, they won't. Do these guys even understand the geopolitical environment that they would be conducting their warfighting functions within? All right, let's go back to what Stu Scheller says about people, ideas, things, okay? In that order. And that whole thing is a Boydism, people, ideas, things in that order. So I put out a video very recently, which I called Principles First, Then People. Now, I don't think that is in conflict with this idea of people, idea, things in that order. Because when you say that, people, ideas, things in that order, I think there's already an assessment there, an assumption there that your principles are already intact, that you're already standing on principles. But what if you're not? What if you're in an organization that has already demonstrated its ability to violate its own stated values? So the military ethos has to be broader than just the warrior ethos. Training hard, conducting realistic training, being physically fit, understanding and possessing that tactical or that operational acumen, understanding your warfighting role. Those are all supremely important, but they can't be divorced from this broader ethos of values. Now, if you're in the Army, and the other services would be very similar, but that is supposed to be part of the ethos. There is a thing called the Army values. And yet, senior military leaders have shown that they will openly violate those values. So, I'm going to personalize this just for a moment. So when I was a brigade executive officer, so this is 2016 into early 2017. Yeah, I mean, this is, 9 years ago. So we'd come home from Afghanistan, the brigade. I had been a battalion operations officer on the deployment. So we came home, and the brigade commander selected me to come from the battalion up to the brigade to be the brigade executive officer. So as the brigade executive officer, you're kind of the chief of staff for the brigade commander's staff. And you interact a lot with the battalion executive officers. Battalion executive officers are their commanders, chiefs of staff, but also the battalion level. If you're the executive officer, you're basically the 2IC. You're the second in command behind the battalion commander. So anyway, so I was now up at the brigade. I was the brigade executive officer. It wouldn't exactly be correct to say that a brigade executive officer is the second in command of the brigade, because I was a major, and therefore behind the brigade commander, but ahead of me, you would have had all 7 of the battalion commanders. They all outranked me, obviously, but they're down in their battalions commanding their battalions, and I'm up at the brigade level. Okay, so I'm a brigade executive officer, and I learned a lot in that position. And but one of the roles that I had, and this may be different with different brigade commanders, but so this was in the what's called 2BCT, so the Second Brigade Combat Team of the 10th Mountain Division at Fort Drum, New York. And so the way that my brigade commander did it, and they switched out shortly after I came into this role, and a new brigade commander came in. But so company commanders, which are captains, so guys typically like in their late 20s or so, unless maybe they were in the Army, enlisted before they became an officer. So they've already been lieutenants, now they're captains, and they've been put in command of one of the companies in the brigade. And a brigade of this size has a ton of companies, because that's 7 battalions, and the battalions have anywhere between like 4 to 7 companies in them. So anyway, point being, so when you are selected for company command, you are put into company command by the brigade commander. So the commander 2 levels up. Okay, that's a big deal in the Army, kind of like 2 levels up, 2 levels up, 2 levels down. So anyway, brigade commanders put company commanders into positions. All right, battalion commanders, the battalion is in between the brigade and company. Battalion commanders select platoon leaders. The platoon is below the company. So platoon leaders are lieutenants, company commanders are captains, battalion commanders are lieutenant colonels, brigade commanders are colonels. All right. So you select the leaders for these big time leadership positions 2 levels below. So when I was so this is when I'm a brigade executive officer as a major, but several years later, when I was a battalion commander, it was my brigade commander that was putting in the company commanders in the companies that were in my battalion. So even though I'm their direct boss, I don't select them for company command. The brigade commander does. All right, great. If that doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it. So when one company commander is going to leave position and another is going to come in, it's a big deal. First of all, they have to inventory a ton of equipment, and that is very thorough, very meticulously documented, etc., because it's worth a lot of money, and someone has to be responsible for that. All right, so there's that. So it's literally going through, 2 guys, the outgoing commander and the incoming commander, meticulously going through and doing their inventories of equipment. But there's a lot of other things that have to happen so that the incoming guy kind of understands, at least to some degree, where the company's at, what the company is doing, some of the personalities in the company before his predecessor takes off. So there is a time that is set aside for them to do this transition period. And typically that transition period will open up with a briefing, that happens between the 2 company commanders, outgoing and incoming. and the brigade commander. And then after all their inventories and this transition takes place, then they will do an outbrief to the brigade commander. Well, that's a lot because there are a lot of companies. Brigade commander is very busy, and companies are always changing. And so if he has to do 2 briefs with these 2 commanders, that's a lot. So I don't necessarily know how other brigades do it, but for me, the way it was done was I would do as the brigade executive officer, I would do the in brief with the 2 company commanders. And the brigade commander, of course, would do the out brief, because a lot of times that out brief may happen like 1 to 2 days before the actual change of command. So that is kind of a last opportunity for the brigade commander to kind of say, hey, are we good here? Are you ready to take command? Are your inventories done? Is everything straight? Is there something that you're uncomfortable with this company that you are about to assume command? And then there are kind of points of guidance that the brigade commander will give to this new commander before he assumes command. All right, great. But I would a lot of times do the in brief before they would start kind of this transition period, right? All right, cool. Sorry for the preamble there. So I remember, I'm a major. These are 2 captains. I'm several years ahead of them in terms of experience in the Army. And I would say to them, hey, you guys are company commanders now, right? So, and I'm primarily talking to the guy who's incoming. And I would say, you have to now, even in a combat infantry brigade, which is what this brigade was. Now, not all the company commanders were infantry guys, but a lot of them were, and a lot of them were combat engineers or artillery or logistics, whatever. But it's a combat infantry brigade. Tactics matter, being physically fit matters. And I would tell these guys, you are now a company commander. You have to bring more to the table than just being physically fit and tactically sound. Like, those things are super important. They may even be the most important, but they're not all that matters. Like, that's the starting point. It's not the end point. You can get away with that when you're a lieutenant, maybe even a junior captain. You cannot get away with it in this brigade as a company commander. You got all these other things that you also have to worry about. You have administrative systems you have to worry about. You have your like the family support group, the family readiness group. You have that. You got to worry about that as a company commander. So you have a lot more on your plate and a lot more systems that you have to manage that you didn't have to in a previous job. You have to be meticulous in the maintenance of your systems and your equipment, et cetera. So I would kind of share that, hey, of course, care about what you're doing in the field, care about your training. And yeah, that probably even is most important. And preparing your guys to go on another combat deployment. But understand, you got all these other things you got to worry about too. And you are going to have to prioritize, because you are going to be responsible for more things than you can reasonably do in the time that you're going to have. And you're going to have to prioritize, and some things are not going to be prioritized high, and those priorities may shift at certain times. All right. And you're going to have to, we are going to expect you, and the boss man, the brigade commander is going to expect you to have the professional maturity to kind of understand. All right. So what am I getting at here? So what I was saying is, hey, tactical warfighting may be the most important thing, but it's not the only thing. And sometimes you have to explain this to younger captains, because the Army, and I'm sure it's the same in other services, but certainly the Marines for sure. But so you'll have these young captains that are like ninjas tactically. They're super physically fit, tactically, they're ninjas. And then they go into company command, and all their other systems are like a disaster. And sometimes you got to bring a guy in. You got to be like, hey man, I got it. You are very good at training your company. I got it. You're doing great there. But hey, dude, we got some other things we got to focus on too. You have to apply some organizational energy over here as well. You're a company commander, and you got this really big piece of the pie straight, and you have locked that down. And that is perhaps the highest priority, but it's not the only priority. And you do need to pick up the slack some of these other places. That happens. You got to have those conversations with guys. And then you get guys that are just super talented and they can do it all. They are like hyper fit. They are super tactically sound, but then they're also just, super organized and they got everything on lockdown. So anyway, all right. What is my point? So I would be explaining to these junior guys, and listen, I was on the other end of those conversations when I was a younger officer too, right? And and I'm saying, hey, war fighting is important, maybe even the most important thing, but it's not the only thing. And that's where the conversation starts. That cannot, at this level, and we're talking about junior officers here, captains, but they are commanders. It's the first level in the Army at which you take a legitimate command position. And I would say, this can't be the end point for you. It's a starting point. This cannot be all you bring to the table if you're going to be a successful company commander. This position is going to require more from you than what you were maybe able to get away with in the past. Okay. There's kind of this joke that like a lieutenant in the Army, battalion commander asks him some question, and the lieutenant responds, sir, I don't know, but I can do 120 push-ups. And the battalion commander's like, I'm not the good leader. That's kind of a joke, obviously, intentionally hyperbolic here. But the point there is, as a lieutenant, if you can run fast and do like a lot of push-ups or pull-ups as a lieutenant in the Army, that is great. That is really good. And I was very physically fit when I was a lieutenant, captain, So, but there gets to a point where it's like, you got to bring more to the table now. You're moving up in the ranks. You got to be able to bring more to the table than just that. Not that those things cease to be important. All right, so that is junior captains that we're talking about. Okay, where I'm saying you've got all of these other responsibilities that are also important. Okay, but now kind of take that. Let's extrapolate a little bit further and let's look at generals. Do I have to teach you, general? And I don't mean me, but like, let's assume that I was a higher ranking general or whatever. Do I really have to teach you to abide by your oath to the Constitution? I thought that was an assumption. Do I have to spell out to you that you can't break the law? I thought that was an assumption. I thought that 30 years into this profession that you would have understood some of the fundamental pillars that the profession is founded upon. I didn't think that love of country was something we would have to focus on. Like when I talk to junior captains, I assume they're patriotic. I assume they love their country. I assume they're willing to make sacrifices. They wouldn't be in the Army if they weren't. I'm not even talking about the ultimate sacrifice or what. I'm just talking about like sacrifices in general. Being in the military is a hard job. But generals, so if you are so you want to talk about, if I'm talking to captains, I'm talking about tactics. If we're talking about generals, we're typically talking about, it could be tactics, but it also could be the operational level of war. It could be, strategic. But it's like, great, you can be a great war fighter at those levels of war. But if you don't know how to operate lawfully, if you have severed the trust with the American people, then what does it matter how skilled a warfighter you are? Because as you go higher up, there are so many other things that are also very, very, very important. And if you're a general and all you bring to the table is that you were a warfighter, and again, I'm not diminishing the importance of being a warfighter, but if you don't understand the law, then I'm sorry, but you have exceeded your skill set. I can't use you. And when I say this is a hypothetical conversation between, I don't know, somebody who outranks generals, Secretary of Defense, President, assuming that, those guys understand and feel the way that I do. So, all right, I'm going to close this out. I promise I'm going long, but this stuff is important. So I'm going to share with you guys something that I shared as a battalion commander. So I just told you guys some of the stuff that I would explain when I was a major to captains who were coming into company command. Well, now I'm going to explain something that I would share with some of my leaders when I was a battalion commander for the short period of time that I was a battalion commander before I was fired for, not complying with the COVID shot mandate. All right, because if we're going to get the promotion system right, if we want the right leaders in position to lead America's sons and daughters, we have to know what right looks like. And I am not convinced that senior leaders within the Department of Defense know what right looks like. So let me tell you what I tried to teach my subordinates when I was a battalion commander before you fired me. So this is what I would tell them. Okay, so I have a counseling document here that I would share with them. And I would say to them, my priorities for you as a rock solid leader, rock solid was the name of the battalion. My priorities for you as a rock solid leader are to reliably demonstrate that you are able, competent, disciplined, and dependable. This requires you to develop and exude a strong intellect, physical presence, professional competence, moral character, and the ability to serve as a role model to others in the formation. I'm going to skip down a little bit and I'm going to read a paragraph here. So this is what I would give to my company commanders when I would bring them in and kind of counsel them on what my expectations of them were, but also to the two majors, so the operations officer and the executive officer in the battalion, and even the battalion command sergeant major. So kind of the senior leaders in the battalion, that I would counsel. So anyway, so people who kind of directly reported to me. So I have under this, I mentioned here, this requires you to develop and exude a strong intellect, physical presence, professional competence, moral character, and the ability to serve as a role model to others in the formation. So then I have a paragraph explaining what each of those is, according to me. So here's what I wrote for moral character. Rock solid leaders, and again, that's the name of the battalion, rock solid leaders are able to identify dilemmas and make ethically sound decisions. They are always focused on doing right by our mission, our soldiers, and our families. I am impressed by leaders who always showcase their integrity and unyielding character. Consequences be damned. Now, you've heard me say that before because this was kind of a slogan that I would use with my subordinates, and when I say consequences be damned, I really mean like personal consequences be damned. Do the right thing because it's the right thing. Personal consequences be damned. Anyway, so I went on to say, train your subordinates on the importance of acting ethically and integrate it into your tactical scenarios, meaning like tactical training scenarios, counselings, and philosophies. Where appropriate, use Uniform Code of Military Justice actions to reinforce the importance of ethical conduct and professionalism. Meaning, if someone gets in trouble and you have to administer, some sort of correction or punishment under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, it's not about just dropping the hammer. It's about using that as a learning opportunity. Acting with integrity is more than just a CYA activity. Obviously, that means cover your ass. I will never ask you to do something that I feel is immoral, unethical, illegal, or unconstitutional. If you ever believe that I do, approach me for additional clarity or to correct me in the event that I'm wrong. What's the lesson here? I'm not perfect. You ever think that I've asked you to do something illegal, immoral, etc., you come talk to me about it. And if I'm wrong and you correct me, then good on you. Even if I'm your boss. I expect your subordinates to expect the same standard of you. American citizens have entrusted us to exercise violence on their behalf. We damn well better do so ethically. Nothing less should be expected. I value leaders who, with a clear purpose in mind, guide their subordinates to loyally pursue that stated purpose above the leader, meaning it's about the purpose, not just about the leader. I value humble leaders able to elevate others, who exercise both audacity and patience, and who pursue personal and organizational growth. Learn to deliver bad news professionally, accept responsibility, explain actions taken, next actions to be taken, and assistance required. This is a skill that comes with experience and requires judgment. Teach this important skill to your subordinates. Anyway, so that's a paragraph from some of my counseling that I used as a battalion commander with some of my subordinates. That was specifically the paragraph that I included about moral character, something that I think is very important, something that I thought was very important at the time. And as I have explained many, many, many times, when I took battalion command, I knew I would be fired. I knew I would be fired. Okay. I knew that all these things that I was teaching others, there was going to come a moment in time in which I was going to have to make good on what I was teaching others to do. That doesn't mean that I'm a great person. That doesn't mean that I'm some freaking paragon of, courage or integrity or whatever. It just means that I believe in doing the right thing because it's the right thing, regardless of the personal consequences. And so when I refused to go along with the treason that was the COVID operation, it's because I actually love my country. It's because I refused to give up on the oath that I had taken to support and defend the Constitution. I refused to piss on the American flag, which all, without exception, senior military leaders have done, metaphorically speaking, of course. But I mean that very seriously. So DoD right now wants us to believe that they are going to correct their deficiencies in officer promotions within the military. And I say, good. But you have yet to prove to the American people that you truly understand the deficiencies that exist in the system. Thank you.